The world has always been filled with stories. Some speak of gods, others of heroes, and many of beings that exist somewhere in between, half believed, half imagined. As we wander through these tales, we find creatures who live not in cages or zoos, but in forests, rivers, mountains, and in the folds of memory itself. Tonight, we will follow a path that stretches across continents. In the misty mountains of the Philippines, the Tikbalang waits, a strange horse-like trickster, said, to confuse travelers and twist the paths beneath their feet. Far away, in the quiet shrines and fox-dotted hills of Japan, the Kitsune flickers, a shape-shifting fox spirit, sometimes mischievous, sometimes kind, always mysterious. From there we drift into darker territory, where the night winds of Southeast Asia whisper of the Pontianak, a restless spirit, tied to sorrow and haunting, carried in the fragrance of frangipani and the cry of night birds. In Scotland's harsh northern seas, the terrifying Nuckelavee rises, half horse and half nightmare, its skinless body reminding us of the fear of untamed nature. And finally, we return to the deserts and villages of the Americas, where the Chupacabra emerged in modern times. Its name means goat sucker, yet its legend has become far larger, a modern myth woven into old fears of the night. These five beings do not belong to one land or one people. They belong to the human imagination, a map of our hopes and our terrors, our warnings and our wonders. As we drift deeper into their stories, let us remember, every culture shapes its fears and dreams into forms. And sometimes, those forms walk beside us in the night. Some creatures live deep in the forests, others dwell in rivers, mountains, or the restless air of night. They appear in folktales, warnings, and whispers, always half seen but never forgotten. Tonight, we travel across the world to meet five such beings: the horse-like Tikbalang of the Philippines, the fox spirit Kitsune of Japan, the sorrowful Pontianak of Southeast Asia, the terrifying Nuckelavee of Scotland, and the mysterious Chupacabra of the Americas. Each is more than a monster. Each is a mirror of human fear, imagination, and memory. Let us follow their shadows together, as softly as the night follows the stars. Folklore often begins with whispers of fear, yet if it endures, it takes on new roles, not just as a warning of danger, but as a story, a metaphor, a shared symbol. The Chupacabra, born in the shadows of Puerto Rican farms, grew into a legend that spanned continents. And as time passed, it did something remarkable. It became more than just a predator of goats. It became a cultural figure, woven into modern imagination. Today, the Chupacabra is as likely to be found in cartoons and comics as in the frightened reports of rural farmers. It has appeared in television shows, from children's programs to horror dramas, in novels that mix mystery with the supernatural, and in films that reinvent the creature again and again. Sometimes it is terrifying, with glowing red eyes and reptilian scales. Other times it is playful, mischievous, even sympathetic, a misunderstood outsider wandering through the night. Like so many mythical beings before it, the Chupacabra has learned to wear many masks. Part of its endurance comes from its adaptability. Where older creatures like vampires or werewolves required centuries of tradition to evolve, the Chupacabra has shifted shape in mere decades, mirroring the speed of modern storytelling. In one setting, it is a winged monster from another world, echoing alien encounters. In another, it is a mangy hound skulking near highways. In yet another, it is a folkloric guardian of forests, blamed less for its cruelty and more for its strangeness. These contradictions do not weaken the myth. Instead, they keep it alive. Each generation finds in it a reflection of its own anxieties and fascinations. Beyond entertainment, the Chupacabra holds a symbolic weight. It is often described as a creature that drains without devouring, a parasite rather than a hunter. In this way, it has been read as a metaphor for unseen forces in society, economic struggles, political corruption, or the sense of being consumed by forces beyond one's control. Just as the chupacabra leaves its victims mysteriously lifeless, so too do these hidden pressures leave communities weakened without an obvious explanation. Artists have embraced the chupacabra not only as a creature of fear, but as an emblem of cultural identity. In Puerto Rico and across Latin America, murals and illustrations sometimes depict it with almost affectionate familiarity, as though it belongs not only to the night, but also to the people who first imagined it. It is a reminder that folklore is not just about monsters. It is about communities, about shared stories that bind people together, even when those stories are frightening. The chupacabra has also become a symbol of globalization. Unlike many legends that remain rooted in one culture, this creature leapt almost instantly into international awareness. It is spoken of in the same breath as Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, or the Yeti, legendary beings from very different lands that nonetheless share the same global stage. In the age of television and the internet, the chupacabra demonstrates how myth itself has changed. Stories no longer need centuries to migrate. They travel at the speed of satellites and fiber optics, morphing as they go. For believers, the chupacabra remains real, a lurking danger in the night. For skeptics, it is a fascinating example of mass psychology, of how stories spread and gain power regardless of their origin. And for those who approach it with neither fear nor skepticism, it is simply a beautiful mystery, a tale to tell by firelight, a reminder that the world is still full of unknowns. Ultimately, the chupacabra is not confined to the fields of Puerto Rico or the deserts of Mexico. It roams instead through our collective imagination. It is there in art, in whispers, in playful references on t-shirts, and in quiet fears that something nameless still prowls the night. Whether real or not, it has achieved what all myths strive for: permanence. Folklore rarely stays still. A story told in one village echoes into the next, and soon it travels further, changing slightly with each retelling. The chupacabra is a striking example of this timeless process, though accelerated by the speed of modern media. Within months of its first whispered sightings in Puerto Rico, the creature's legend spread across Latin America, each region shaping it in its own image, each storyteller adding new details, new fears, and new colors to its form. The earliest reports outside Puerto Rico came from Mexico. By the late 1990s, Mexican newspapers ran front-page stories of livestock drained of blood, of shadows flitting through moonlit fields, of something terrible in the night. In rural areas where farming was precarious and drought or crime already weighed heavily on daily life, the chupacabra became a new name for anxiety, a reason to explain sudden loss, a culprit for wounds that no coyote or dog could have made. Farmers built stronger fences, carried weapons on night watches, and whispered prayers that the chupador would pass their herds by. From Mexico, the story spread south into Central America, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. Reports followed a familiar pattern: animals found dead, puncture marks on the body, no signs of struggle. Yet in each place, the description of the chupacabra shifted. In some stories, it was a reptilian beast with leathery wings and sharp spines. In others, it looked like a sick dog, hunched and skeletal. In some villages, it even blended with older tales of vampire-like spirits that haunted the region for centuries. The chupacabra absorbed these older fears, just as a sponge soaks up water. When the legend reached South America, particularly Brazil, Chile, and Argentina, the chupacabra became more monstrous. In Brazil, where belief in strange creatures of the forest already runs deep, it was sometimes linked to alien visitations, glowing in the dark like something not of this world. In Argentina, farmers claimed to see it leap impossible distances, vanishing into the hills after its attacks. These exaggerations were not new to folklore. What was new was how quickly the variations spread, carried by television, newspapers, and radio programs that reported each sighting as though it were evidence in a larger case. By the early 2000s, the chupacabra had crossed into the United States, especially Texas and the Southwest, where ranchers began reporting strange attacks on cattle. Here, too, the image of the creature shifted once again. Skeletal, hairless dogs became the dominant description, often photographed and circulated on the internet as proof Biologists explain these away as coyotes suffering from mange, but for many, that explanation only deepened the mystery. Why, if they were just sick dogs, did the livestock wounds so often seem bloodless? Why did the fear linger generation after generation? In truth, the chupacabra became a mirror for each region's unique anxieties. In Puerto Rico, it emerged during a time of economic strain and cultural change. In Mexico and Central America, it reflected rural fears of losing livelihood and stability. In South America, it blended with long traditions of supernatural forest spirits and modern fascination with extraterrestrials. In the United States, it became a symbol of rural alienation, a mysterious predator lurking on the edges of ranches and highways. And yet, despite all these variations, a common thread tied them together. The image of something stealing life without consuming flesh, something that drained rather than devoured. The act of bloodsucking made the chupacabra unique among predators, and it connected it symbolically to vampires, a universal figure of fear found in every culture. Where the vampire haunted castles and graveyards, the chupacabra haunted barns and fields. Both represented a silent intrusion, a theft of vitality in the dark hours of night. The globalization of the chupacabra was accelerated by its timing. In the 1990s, tabloid television shows like Unsolved Mysteries and Spanish-language programs like Cristina and Primer Impacto featured reports on the creature. Each episode brought the chupacabra to millions of homes, turning a rural fear into a worldwide fascination. The internet, still young at the time, amplified the effect. Online forums buzzed with speculation, photographs of supposed corpses circulated, and debates flared between skeptics and believers. Unlike older folklore that required centuries to spread across continents, the chupacabra did it in a matter of years. It was both ancient and modern, a product of oral tradition and mass media, superstition and technology. That strange duality is what made it powerful. It belonged to everyone and no one at once, changing shape but keeping its essence, the essence of fear, of loss, and of the unknown predator that steals what we cannot protect. The chupacabra is one of the newest figures in the long line of legendary creatures, yet its presence feels as old as fear itself. Unlike many mythical beings, whose stories date back hundreds or even thousands of years, the chupacabra belongs to the late 20th century. It was first reported in Puerto Rico in the mid-1990s, at a time when the island was struggling with economic uncertainty, political tension, and the rising influence of global media. In this environment, the creature took root, not only as a story whispered in rural villages, but as a headline that crossed oceans. The very name, Chupacabra, is direct, practical, and chilling. In Spanish, it translates to goat sucker, describing what it was believed to do: attack livestock, particularly goats, and drain them of blood. Farmers awoke to find their animals lifeless, marked with strange puncture wounds, their bodies otherwise intact. It was not the act of a predator that devoured flesh. It was something stranger, something that seemed to belong more to folklore or horror than to the natural order of predation. At first, the descriptions varied wildly. Witnesses claimed the chupacabra was a reptilian creature, about 3 to 4 feet tall, walking on 2 legs, with glowing red eyes and a row of spines running down its back. Others described it as more like a hairless dog, mangy and gaunt, with leathery skin stretched over a starved frame. In both versions, it carried an otherworldly quality, not simply an animal gone astray, but a shadow of something unknown, even unnatural. The 1990s were also a decade of growing fascination with extraterrestrials, UFO sightings, and conspiracy theories. The chupacabra quickly became part of this broader culture of mystery. Some claimed it was a genetic experiment, escaped from a laboratory. Others whispered it was an alien left behind, its hunger driving it into human lands. Television shows, radio broadcasts, and tabloids amplified the mystery, turning local fear into global intrigue. Within months of its first reports in Puerto Rico, stories of the chupacabra spread to Mexico, then across Latin America, and soon into the southern United States. But what made the chupacabra so effective as a myth was not just its strangeness, but its resonance with old fears. Livestock had always been the backbone of survival in rural communities. A predator that attacked goats or sheep threatened not only food but livelihood, security, and tradition. Where wolves, coyotes, or stray dogs could be understood, the chupacabra defied explanation. It did not eat the animals. It drained them. The wounds were neat, precise, and eerie, as if left by an instrument rather than a JAWTO mini. It was a living metaphor, a creature that represented the draining of life, the intrusion of the unnatural, and the fragility of safety in the night. The fact that it emerged so suddenly, with no deep mythological lineage, only added to its power. The chupacabra felt modern and timeless at once, as though it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows. Today, the chupacabra remains one of the most debated creatures in modern folklore. Biologists point to feral dogs with mange, their hairless, sickly appearance giving rise to terrifying sightings. Farmers, however, continue to insist that no dog could drain blood without tearing flesh. Skeptics and believers alike find themselves caught in the same net, unsure of what it is, but unable to fully dismiss it. The chupacabra is not ancient, yet it carries the weight of older fears. It is not universal, yet its legend has spread across continents. It is not easily categorized, yet it lingers in the imagination. In this, it reflects the truth about folklore, that new stories can be born in our time and still carry the same resonance as the old. The chupacabra began as a whisper in the night, an unsettling story told by farmers who found their animals strangely lifeless in the morning. From those first frightened reports, it stretched outward, growing new shapes and new meanings as it passed from one village to the next, from one country to another, until it became a creature recognized across the globe. We have seen how it first emerged, sudden, mysterious, almost without a past, as though it had stepped fully formed. From fear itself, we followed its trail through fields and deserts, through the voices of witnesses and the pens of investigators. We watched as it adapted, reshaping itself into many forms. Sometimes a reptilian beast, sometimes a dog-like prowler, sometimes even an echo of older myths that spoke of blood and shadows. Finally, we looked at how the chupacabra has lingered, not only in fear but in fascination. It has found its way into art, television, and literature. It has become a shared story, one that belongs to both skeptics and believers, both those who seek evidence and those who simply delight in the mystery. It is no longer just a hunter of goats. It is a hunter of imagination, forever moving through the quiet spaces where belief and disbelief meet. And so the chupacabra rests, not in a cage or in a field, but in the place all enduring myths dwell, the human mind. It is a reminder that even in our modern age, with satellites circling the earth and cameras in every hand, we still long for the unknown. We still crave a touch of mystery in the dark. And we still tell stories, not because they are true or false, but because they remind us that the world has never been entirely explained. The Nuckelavee, though rooted in the folklore of the Orkney Islands, is more than a tale of a sea demon. It is a mirror, a vessel into which centuries of fear, memory, and human struggle have been poured. To examine its symbolism is to see the anxieties of an isolated people, magnified and distilled into a monstrous form that outlived its storytellers. At its core, the Nuckelavee symbolizes the raw hostility of nature. Unlike gods or spirits that balance destruction with fertility, this being offered only ruin. The skinless horsebody, dripping sinew, was an image of suffering. The rider fused to its back, grotesquely human yet inhuman, suggested the collapse of order and reason. Together they formed a single entity of disease and chaos, a visual metaphor for the way famine, pestilence, and storm seemed to arrive all at once, with no relief. To the islanders, who had no control over such calamities, the Nuckelavee gave a shape to the formless. Its inability to cross fresh water is especially symbolic. Streams and rivers, the life veins of the earth, represented purity, renewal, and divine protection. That such a creature could not endure these boundaries speaks to a timeless belief. Evil cannot pass where nature itself restores balance. This contrast between the foul breath that kills and the clear brook that defends makes the Nuckelavee not just a monster of destruction, but also a marker of where safety might be found. For those who lived with few defenses, even small, borders mattered. The Nuckelavee also embodies the terror of the unnatural. Its form is not only frightening, but fundamentally wrong, a fusion of horse and man that defies proper boundaries. Folklore often punishes boundary crossing, and here the punishment is existence itself, a creature trapped in a shape that should not be. This sense of corruption reflects human fear of disease, decay, and mutation. It is horror expressed through the body, horror that makes the skin crawl because it shows us flesh as we should never see it. Psychologically, the Nuckelavee reveals how humans project their anxieties onto the landscape. The Orkney people faced hardships from both sea and land, yet they did not imagine two separate spirits. They imagined one monstrous being, fusing horse, land, and rider, human-like intelligence, into a single doom. This suggests a worldview in which threats blur together, where famine, sickness, and storm are not distinct but entwined. The Nuckelavee becomes a condensation of dread, an embodiment of life lived always at the edge of survival that in broader mythological terms, the creature reflects a universal human instinct to envision monsters that explain suffering without moral cause. Many cultures create figures who punish greed, pride, or disobedience. But the Nuckelavee is different. It harms without reason, breathes plague without judgment. In this way, it acknowledges a truth many myths avoid, that sometimes misfortune is not earned, that pain often strikes the innocent. It is a deeply human recognition, one that makes the creature more terrifying and more honest than most. Even today, the Nuckelavee holds symbolic weight. In literature and modern retellings, it is used to represent plague, ecological ruin, or the destructive side of human ambition. The skinless body becomes a metaphor for exposure, for vulnerability without defense, the inability to cross fresh. Water becomes an allegory for hope, that there is always some boundary, however fragile, against which destruction must stop. The legend continues because it still resonates, still gives language to fears we cannot otherwise name. The monster's endurance also lies in its aesthetic, the grotesque yet majestic fusion of horse and man. Artists, writers, and storytellers return to it because it shocks the imagination. It is the uncanny embodied, a being that should not exist, yet feels disturbingly possible. This blend of impossibility and plausibility is what gives the Nuckelavee life across centuries. In every age, people find in its form a reflection of their own nightmares. Thus, the Nuckelavee is not only a monster of the Orkney seas, but a symbol of timeless truths: the cruelty of nature, the fragility of human life, and the endurance of fear. To know it is to glimpse how people once made sense of their suffering. To remember it is to acknowledge that those fears of plague, famine, disaster without reason are still with us. The skinless rider on the horse of doom gallops, not just in legend, but in the corners of the human mind. To the people of the Orkney Islands, the Nuckelavee was not merely a tale for long winter nights. It was a living fear, a presence felt in every unexpected misfortune. The monster was a kind of explanation: when crops withered before harvest, when cattle sickened without clear cause, when a sudden gale tore down the coast, the name of the Nuckelavee explained it. The demon became a kind of shorthand for disaster itself, a word that encompassed the cruelty of nature and the uncertainty of survival. Island life was fragile. The sea was both lifeline and executioner. Fishermen who went out under calm skies might never return, their boats splintered by storms that rose with little warning. Children who wandered too close to the shore might vanish beneath waves. Fields that promised abundance in early summer might shrivel before autumn. In such an environment, superstition was a natural shield. Belief in the Nuckelavee allowed islanders to place a face upon the facelessness of ruin. It gave voice to the whispering dread that lived at the edges of their lives. The demon's influence was also woven into behavior and moral lessons. Mothers told their children to stay near home by warning them of the Nuckelavee stalking the night. Farmers explained sudden cattle disease as the monster's foul breath. Fishermen, preparing to sail, might cross themselves not just against the raw sea but against the demon who ruled it. In this way, the Nuckelavee was a disciplinary figure, a force that reinforced caution, humility, and respect toward a landscape that demanded both. Its most terrifying power was its breath, believed to spread plague and blight. Arcadian tradition held that when crops blackened and rotted, it was the touch of the demon. When epidemics spread through livestock, leaving fields empty of life, it was his curse. This transformed the Nuckelavee into more than a sea demon. It became a symbol of contagion itself, invisible yet devastating. In this role, the creature reflected how communities made sense of disease before science gave names and causes. When no medicine could prevent illness, a story at least could contain it, making the incomprehensible tangible. The Nuckelavee was also tied to seasons. In winter, when storms raged, the demon was imagined at its strongest. But traditions tell that, in summer, during a period known as the Mither o' the Sea's reign, the Nuckelavee's power was restrained. The Mither, an ancient sea mother figure, was said to keep the demon in check, preventing it from destroying the islands entirely. This balance of forces illustrates a worldview in which no terror is absolute. Even the darkest monster must submit to older, larger cycles of nature. Here, the Nuckelavee became part of a cosmic rhythm, embodying not just chaos but also the need for order that contains it. Stories of encounters with the Nuckelavee abound in oral tradition. One often repeated tale speaks of a man pursued across the moors by the demon. With every step, he felt the heat of its breath upon his neck, the sound of its hooves pounding behind him. Only by leaping across a small stream did he escape, as the Nuckelavee halted at the water's edge, unable to cross fresh water. Such tales reinforced the idea of rivers as holy boundaries, safe lines drawn in the land against the reach of chaos. For islanders, even small brooks gained spiritual weight as lifelines, sacred because they stopped the monster at their banks. Fear of the Nuckelavee was also reinforced by silence. In many accounts, islanders avoided even naming it aloud, preferring to refer to it obliquely. To name was to invite. To invite was to risk. In this way, the demon's power was sustained not only by description but by absence, by the unsaid weight of dread. This silence reveals a psychological truth. Sometimes, fear grows most when left unspoken. For generations, the Nuckelavee was both told and untold, present in the very gaps of conversation. Perhaps most chilling is how the Nuckelavee represents humanity's understanding of evil that is without purpose. Unlike many folkloric beings, who punish arrogance or reward respect, the Nuckelavee harms indiscriminately. It breeds plague not as justice, but as impulse. This randomness reflected the harsh realities of Orkney life. Storms do not choose victims. Diseases do not punish only the guilty. In this sense, the monster was not a moral teacher but a truth teller, embodying a world where disaster often arrives without reason. That may be the most terrifying lesson of all. Thus, in daily life, the Nuckelavee was everywhere, in the failing harvest, in the sick child, in the sudden storm. It was an invisible inhabitant of the islands, a constant reminder that the line between survival and ruin was thin. To live with such a figure was to live always alert, always humbled by forces greater than oneself. In this way, the monster did not simply haunt Orkney. It defined it. The folklore of the Orkney Islands is filled with strange, uneasy shapes. Surrounded by restless seas and shifting skies, the islanders lived with the knowledge that nature was never far from violence. Their myths reflect this: beings who rise from the waves, spirits who haunt the winds, creatures whose very presence brings blight to the land. Among all these figures, none is so feared or so grotesque as the Nuckelavee. To speak its name was to summon dread. To describe its form was to call up images of something so profoundly unnatural that it could not belong to earth or sea, yet belonged to both. The Nuckelavee is a hybrid monster, often described as part horse, part man, yet fully neither. The most consistent account portrays a horse's body as the base, but fused grotesquely to it is the torso of a man rising where the horse's head should be, long arms dragging nearly to the ground. Its skinless flesh reveals raw muscle and pulsing veins. Its head is massive, with a single glaring eye that shines red like burning coal, and its mouth twists into a perpetual grin of cruelty. From its horse body breathes a foul stench, and Its breath itself is said to cause crops to fail and livestock to sicken. It is not merely monstrous in form, but in influence. Its very presence carries disease, drought, and famine. Unlike other spirits of Scottish lore, the Nuckelavee does not carry nuance or shifting moral roles. Many beings, like kelpies or fairies, could be helpful or harmful depending on circumstance. The Nuckelavee, by contrast, embodies unrelenting malice. It is a personification of destruction, often linked to the harsh realities of island life. Arcadians knew storms that tore fishing boats apart, famines that shriveled their crops, plagues that left families bereft. In this creature, they condensed all their terrors into one overwhelming figure. It was easier to name disaster when it had a face, however hideous. The monster's origins are bound to the sea. The Orkney Islands, isolated and surrounded by treacherous waters, look to the ocean as both lifeblood and threat. The Nuckelavee comes ashore from the deep, crawling from the waves to prowl the land at night. It cannot cross fresh water, and so rivers and lochs became sacred boundaries against it. Island tradition held that if one were pursued by the Nuckelavee, only by leaping across running water could one escape. In this way, the creature also mapped the geography of the islands, seas for its domain, rivers as humanity's fragile lines of defense. Its mythology may also reflect older pre-Christian beliefs. Some scholars see in the Nuckelavee remnants of a sea god or ocean spirit, later recast as entirely malevolent in a Christian moral framework. The Orkney Islands were crossroads of Norse and Celtic cultures, and both traditions carried with them powerful oceanic deities. Over centuries, as older worship was demonized, what might once have been a neutral or even revered being transformed into a nightmare figure. In its cruelty, we see the shadow of a fallen god, stripped of any benevolence, and left as a pure embodiment of fear. The climate of the Orkneys added weight to this myth. The winds there are relentless, salt-heavy, bending trees and tearing at roofs. Crops were always uncertain, and fishing was perilous. A sudden shift of tide could mean death. In this world, the Nuckelavee was never an abstract tale. It was a reflection of daily precarity. To see blight spreading through fields or cattle dying from strange sicknesses was to believe the demon had breathed upon the land. In many ways, the Nuckelavee was not just a story to frighten children, but a vocabulary to explain the inexplicable, to give shape to the cruelty of nature. The Nuckelavee also stands apart in folklore because of its grotesque physicality. Many spirits are described vaguely: shadows, voices, shapes in mist. But the Nuckelavee is defined by the specificity of its horror: skinless flesh, veins oozing, a single burning eye. This visceral detail suggests its power as an oral tradition. The story had to shock listeners into silence, imprinting itself so strongly that no one could forget. And indeed, across centuries, it has not been forgotten. The islanders may not speak its name often, but when they do, it remains charged with the same raw terror. If the Orkney Islands are landscapes of stark beauty, the Nuckelavee is their shadow self. Beauty inverted, sea transformed into a nightmare, survival twisted into destruction. To study its origins is to glimpse the soul of a people shaped by harsh environment and deeper imagination. The Nuckelavee is not simply a monster. It is the embodiment of an entire worldview, one where the line between human life and natural disaster is terrifyingly thin, and where only story can make sense of it. The Nuckelavee stands as one of the darkest visions in folklore. Unlike benevolent spirits or even trickster beings, it carried no lesson of moral order, no promise of reward for virtue. It was, instead, a raw reflection of dread. It embodied plague and famine, the cruel indifference of storms, and the feeling of helplessness before forces far greater than human will. The Orkney Islanders. It was not just a tale to frighten children, but a way of naming the shapeless. In giving horror a form, a skinless horse, a rider fused grotesquely, a breath that poisons, they gave themselves a way to speak of calamities that otherwise defied explanation. In the Nuckelavee grotesque body lay the truth of survival. On the edge of the world, that suffering often came without cause, and that safety could be found only in small, fragile sanctuaries, a running stream, a boundary evil could not cross. Today, the Nuckelavee endures not because we still fear its hooves on the shoreline, but because we still recognize its meaning. The image of destruction without reason is timeless. Its terror lies not only in its form, but in the silence of its intent. It comes not for justice or vengeance, but simply because ruin is part of the world. And yet, as with many old stories, there is a strange comfort in remembering it. For in the telling, fear is given edges. In the myth, chaos is made visible. By speaking of the Nuckelavee, the Orkney people tamed it just enough to endure. And by remembering it now, we too acknowledge the truth their story carried, that even in the darkest times, where fear gallops unchecked, there are always streams of protection, however narrow, that keep hope alive. Thus, the Nuckelavee remains not only a monster of the sea, but a symbol of resilience, of the human need to tell stories that carry our fears, and of the thin lines that separate terror from safety. It is a shadow we no longer see in the waves, but one we still recognize in the echoes of our own vulnerability. The night is not always a place of rest. In many parts of the world, it is where fear is sharpened, where shadows lengthen into stories, and where silence carries the weight of whispers. In the humid darkness of Southeast Asia, beneath the sway of palm trees and the quiet drift of the moonlight, one such whisper has endured for centuries. It is the story of the Pontianak, a spirit born of sorrow, wrapped in beauty, and marked by tragedy. The Pontianak is said to be the spirit of a woman who died during childbirth. In her death, her grief hardened into anger, and her longing for what was lost became a haunting presence that would not leave the living untouched. She is often described as strikingly beautiful, appearing as a pale woman with long, dark hair flowing past her shoulders and dressed in a simple white gown. At first glance, she is alluring, even serene, like the faint outline of a dream against the moonlit sky. Yet behind this fragile image lies danger. Those who know the legends tell of the fragrance that heralds her approach. It begins as something deceptively pleasant, the sweet scent of jasmine flowers drifting through the night air. But as she draws closer, the perfume turns rancid, decaying into a smell of rot that clings to the nostrils. For those who encounter her, the shift in scent is the last warning before she reveals her true nature. In place of the gentle face and graceful figure emerges a ghastly form. Pale skin stretched thin, sharp nails, and a mouth hungering for vengeance. She is not confined to one village or island. Her tale is woven across Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, and in every place her story is told, she reflects something slightly different. To some, she is a restless ghost, caught between worlds. To others, she is an omen of death, stalking men in particular as if holding humanity itself accountable for her suffering. In every retelling, she is both mourned and feared, pitted and hated, a paradox given form. The Pontianak's presence is most often linked to the fringes of ordinary life. She lingers near banana trees, whose long leaves shiver in the night breeze. She is said to perch among their shadows, waiting, watching. The stillness of tropical nights, where crickets drone endlessly and the air clings heavy with moisture, becomes her stage. Travelers tell of riding home late from work, hearing the cry of an infant in the distance. Drawn by pity or curiosity, they follow the sound, only to discover it was no child, but the trick of a Pontianak luring them closer. Her story, like so many others of her kind, is at once supernatural and deeply human. She is the embodiment of pain unresolved, of lives cut short, of injustice never healed. Where rational explanations falter, myths step in to articulate what cannot be named. The Pontianak speaks to the fear of losing mothers, wives, and daughters to the dangerous threshold of childbirth, a fear that has haunted human communities for millennia. In telling her story, people found a way to make sense of those losses, even if only by giving them a ghostly shape. But the Pontianak is not only sorrow. She is also power. In patriarchal societies where women's voices were often silenced, the myth of the Pontianak gave space to a figure who demanded attention. Though frightening, she cannot be ignored. Her beauty captivates. Her vengeance terrifies. Her name alone makes grown men hesitate before taking a lonely road at night. In this way, she becomes a strange inversion of power. Even in death, denied peace, she claims influence over the living. Legends tell that she preys on men in particular, especially those who are arrogant or unkind. It is said that she hides her claws until the moment she strikes, plunging them deep into her victim's body. Yet for all the violence of her myth, she is not described as a mindless monster. Rather, she is sorrow wrapped in rage, beauty wrapped in danger, a reminder that grief can curdle into something fierce, and that those wronged by life may linger long after they are gone. On quiet nights, when the jasmine blooms by the roadside, and the air grows thick with fragrance, many still pause. They breathe in cautiously, wondering if the sweetness will shift, if the decay will follow. Even today, when electric lights push back against the shadows, the Pontianak lingers in memory. She is a reminder of how thin the boundary is between life and death, between love and fear, between beauty and horror. And perhaps that is why she endures, not only as a story told to frighten children, but as a ghost who reflects the depths of human vulnerability and loss. The Pontianak does not walk loudly. She does not need to. She drifts with the night air, with the swaying palms, with the blossoms that open and close. And in that drifting, she becomes less a creature of terror and more a symbol of pain carried forward, of longing that refuses to fade, of the way grief reshapes the world for those who remain. The Pontianak is never just a ghost wandering in the night. She is also a mirror. When people speak of her, they are not only talking about some supernatural being hiding in banana groves or whispering on the edges of roads. They are also talking about themselves, about their griefs, their fears, and their anxieties wrapped in myth. In this sense, she is both a creature of the unseen world and a storyteller of the human one. To consider the curious detail of her beauty. Almost every telling insists that the Pontianak appears first as a lovely woman. Her hair is long, her eyes deep, her skin pale against the darkness. She is inviting rather than threatening, at least until her anger is revealed. Why should a spirit of vengeance appear in this way? The answer lies in the human heart. Desire and danger often walk hand in hand. In patriarchal societies where men wielded power, the idea of a woman who could not be resisted, and yet who would punish with her embrace, was both a fantasy and a warning. Here, the Pontianak is not just a ghost of a mother who died in childbirth. She is also a guardian of boundaries. She reminds men that their desires have consequences, that arrogance and cruelty are not without cost. In this way, her myth is moral as much as supernatural. Her presence tells stories of fidelity, of humility, of respect toward women who give life. She is the voice of grief turned outward, saying, "You cannot take without giving. You cannot exploit without paying. You cannot forget without remembering." But she is also the voice of sorrow itself. Imagine a village 100 years ago where childbirth was dangerous and many women did not survive it. Mothers and daughters were lost suddenly, leaving families broken and children orphaned. How could such tragedies be explained, especially when medicine was scarce and death seemed cruelly arbitrary? One answer was to say, "She is still here." The mother did not vanish into silence. She returned as the Pontianak, her voice sharper, her presence undeniable. Her myth gave the dead a way of speaking back to the living. The jasmine fragrance that surrounds her is no small detail. It is almost poetic, a flower often associated with love, purity, and night blooming. Its sweetness should comfort, but here it deceives. The perfume becomes a trick of perception, a reminder that not all beauty is safe. In this sense, the Pontianak embodies contradiction. The same symbol that soothes also unsettles. The same figure who could have been a gentle spirit of love instead became a warning. Stories of her attacks linger in whispered folklore. It is said that she chooses men most of all, clawing at them until they bleed, consuming them with a hunger that is as much symbolic as physical. And yet, others tell of ways to ward her off. A nail, it is said, driven into the nape of her neck, could transform her from monster to woman once more. Bound by the nail, she could even become a wife, living quietly in a household until the nail was removed. This unsettling belief reveals something telling: the attempt to tame female power, to render the terrifying into the domestic, to reduce the ghost into an obedient figure. It reflects human attempts not only to manage fear, but to control what frightens society most. An independent woman whose pain cannot be silenced at the same time. These stories carry a layer of tenderness. Behind the claws and the rotting stench, behind the cries in the forest and the chilling laughter, the Pontianak is still a mother who died in tragedy. Her rage is born of abandonment, her sorrow of a life cut short. For some, she is a frightening reminder of mortality. For others, she is an emblem of grief that has no words. In both readings, she lingers, night after night, because her story is still unfinished. It is not surprising that her myth has endured into the present day. Even as cities grow and electric lights chase shadows away, the Pontianak appears in films, in books, in whispered anecdotes. She haunts urban apartments as easily as rural groves. Some claim to hear her babies cry in the static of radios or the hum of empty hallways. Others say the scent of jasmine will drift through open windows in the dead of night, even when no flowers are blooming nearby. The world changes, but grief does not. Fear of loss does not. That is why she remains. Her name alone is enough to still conversations. For those who grew up hearing her tales, even the suggestion of her presence brings goosebumps. And yet, there is something strangely comforting about her too. She reminds the living that their sorrows do not vanish unacknowledged. She assures them that grief leaves marks, that loss is remembered, that those taken too soon are not entirely gone. In that paradox, the Pontianak becomes more than just a ghost. She becomes part of the human way of coping with the unbearable as the night air clings heavy, as the frogs call from ditches and the banana leaves rustle. Her myth settles into the imagination. She belongs to the twilight between fear and beauty, between longing and terror. She is not simply meant to terrify, but to teach, to remind, and to preserve the memory of those silenced by time. And so, when we speak of the Pontianak, we speak not only of the dead, but of the living who made sense of death by weaving her into their nights. When we imagine the Pontianak today, she is no longer only a whisper under the banana trees of rural villages. She has followed people into cities, onto screens, and into modern imagination. What began as a ghost story told by firelight is now a figure recognized across Southeast Asia and beyond. This transformation reveals something powerful. Myths do not fade. They change shape, finding new ways to speak to the anxieties of each age. The 20th century marked the Pontianak's migration from oral folklore into popular media. Early films in Malaysia and Indonesia seized upon her chilling beauty. Black and white cinema, grainy and shadowed, lent itself perfectly to her presence. Actresses appeared with flowing hair and pale gowns, their eyes lined dark to accentuate menace. These films were often low in budget but high in cultural impact. For many, they were the first time an oral story became a visual reality, flickering on a public screen. The terror was not confined to private imagination anymore. It was shared, collective. Yet even as she frightened audiences, the Pontianak became oddly beloved. Viewers spoke of her with a mixture of dread and affection, laughing nervously as they left theaters. Over time, her image grew iconic. The white dress, the flowing black hair, the uncanny cry in the night. She joined a global family of ghostly women, like Japan's Yuri or the Western Banshee, who carry grief into the world of the living. But unlike them, the Pontianak retained her deep ties to motherhood, to childbirth, and to the specifically local fears of Southeast Asia. Her story adapted as culture changed. In the late 20th century, as cities grew denser, people began reporting Pontianak sightings not only in villages but also on highways, in apartment buildings, and near construction sites. The myth proved remarkably flexible. Wherever danger lurked, she could be imagined. An unfinished skyscraper at night, dimly lit and empty, could feel just as haunted as a grove of banana trees. In this way, the Pontianak modernized alongside her storytellers. But it is in the age of the internet that she has reached her widest audience. Online forums, social media posts, and digital folklore have given her new life. Videos circulate claiming to show her pale figure drifting across roads. Horror podcasts retell her legend with fresh flourishes. Memes reduce her terrifying presence into humor, turning fear into play. And yet, for many, she still carries real power. In the quiet of night, a sudden whiff of jasmine or the distant cry of a baby can still bring goosebumps, even if one laughs at memes by daylight. The Pontianak's survival rests on her ability to embody universal themes. She represents grief at sudden death, particularly deaths of women in childbirth. She represents the fear of desire, the danger of being lured by beauty. She embodies social tensions, gendered fears, moral warnings, cultural anxieties about women's roles. These concerns are timeless, even as technology changes. That is why she lingers, why she reappears in every new medium. There is also an aesthetic appeal to her story. The imagery of the Pontianak, pale against dark, floral scent masking decay, laughter rising into a scream, has a poetry that captures artists and audiences alike. She is cinematic, musical, painterly. Musicians write songs inspired by her. Painters depict her hovering in forests or streets. Writers place her in short stories where she blurs the line between lover and predator. In every case, she is compelling because she is more than a monster. She is tragedy wrapped in allure. Modern horror in Southeast Asia often returns to her figure, not only to frighten, but to reflect. Directors craft films where the Pontianak is less a villain than a misunderstood spirit, a woman wronged by injustice. These stories highlight her humanity, suggesting that she is not merely punishing men at random, but reacting to betrayal, cruelty, or violence. In this way, she shifts from a figure of simple fear into one of empathy, a spectral reminder of pain carried across generations. There is irony in her journey. Once, she was a whispered warning told to children, "Behave, or the Pontianak will come." Now, she has become a symbol of identity. Young artists reference her with pride, saying she belongs to their cultural heritage. She is an emblem of storytelling power, of how folklore defines communities. What was once only fear is now also pride, fascination, and artistry. And yet, despite these shifts, the old dread has not vanished. In quiet places of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, some still insist that she is real. Taxi drivers tell stories of picking up lone women at night who disappear from their back seats. Farmers whisper about scents drifting through the fields with no flowers to explain them. Couples walking home after dark claim to hear faint laughter just beyond the trees. Such tales, whether believed or not, keep the tradition alive. The Pontianak, then, is a ghost who has refused to die, not in folklore, not in film, not in memory. She has moved from banana groves to internet feeds, from oral tradition to streaming platforms. But always, she carries with her the same message: grief does not fade. Desire carries danger, and beauty hides shadows. Her legend is at once ancient and modern, rooted and restless, frightening and strangely tender. To speak of her today is to join a conversation that has lasted for centuries. She is more than a ghost. She is a cultural companion, a figure who travels with her people across time, carrying their fears and hopes in her story. In that way, she remains alive, even in death. The Pontianak is more than a ghost story whispered in the night. Across three lenses: her folkloric origins, her haunting presence in everyday life, and her evolution into a cultural icon, we see how she has lived on through centuries of storytelling. She is not static. She shifts, adapts, and finds her way into each generation's imagination. At her root, the Pontianak represents the raw terror of lives cut short, especially the deep sorrow of women dying during childbirth. In a world where medicine was fragile and death frequent, this fear was real, urgent, and inescapable. She gave voice to grief, embodying the cries that could not be spoken aloud. Her myth reminded people of life's fragility and the cost of ignoring respect for the unseen in daily life. She was both warning and presence. Farmers, travelers, and families shaped their routines around the possibility of her nearness. She became a constant reminder that nature was alive with spirits, that every tree and path could hold danger. In this way, she was woven into the very fabric of existence, not as fantasy, but as a fact of how people experienced the world. Over time, her image softened and transformed. Through theater, film, and now digital culture, She has become a recognizable figure across Southeast Asia. What was once a whispered terror is now also a symbol of identity, a folklore that refuses to vanish. She belongs not only to the past, but to the present, resurfacing in art, cinema, and even humor, while still retaining her aura of unease. Her story endures because she embodies truths that do not fade. Grief can echo long after death. Beauty can conceal peril. Justice, when denied, may return in spectral form. These are not only Southeast Asian concerns, but universal ones, which explains why her image resonates across borders and generations. The to speak of the Pontianak today is to recognize the persistence of memory. It is to see how folklore holds its people, shaping identity as much as it reflects fear. She is at once a ghost, a symbol, and an icon, a bridge between the ancient and the modern, the village and the city, the past and the ever-present now. The Pontianak laughs in the dark, and, though centuries have passed, humanity still listens. The world of the Kitsune does not stay fixed in shrines and fields alone. It follows into homes, into dreams, and into the fragile spaces between belief and reality. If the first tales speak of foxes seen in the mist, the second thread of lore is woven around transformations and possessions, where the boundary between human and spirit becomes porous and uncertain. To live in old Japan, especially in its villages and smaller towns, was to live with the quiet possibility that a fox spirit could walk among you, cloaked in the shape of a person you thought you knew. Transformation, or henge, is perhaps the most famous gift of the Kitsune. Unlike simple magic tricks, this art is imagined as a deep discipline that foxes master only after long years. A fox does not simply decide to become a person. It studies, practices, and refines its illusion until the disguise is flawless. Legends tell of foxes stealing garments, using reeds and leaves as charms, or even drawing on moonlight itself to perfect their new forms. A single misstep could betray them. A tail glimpsed beneath robes, a shadow that shows vulpine ears, or a reflection in water that gives away their true shape. These slips became the small details that storytellers cherished, tiny reminders that no enchantment is ever perfect. Among these transformations, the most poignant stories are those of foxwives. In such tales, a man encounters a woman of extraordinary beauty, often wandering alone at night. She becomes his companion, his wife, the mother of his children. For years, perhaps decades, they live together in harmony. The household prospers, love flourishes, and nothing seems amiss. But then, by chance, the man discovers a clue. Perhaps he sees his wife combing her hair and notices a tail unfurling behind her, or perhaps a neighbor whispers suspicions. In that moment, the illusion shatters. Sometimes the foxwife flees at once, returning to the wilderness, leaving behind a broken-hearted family. Sometimes she remains, revealing that her love had become true even if it began in trickery. These stories, half sad and half tender, remind listeners of love's fragility and the way illusion can still give rise to genuine feeling. But the Kitsune's powers extend beyond love. Possession is another strand of lore, darker and more unsettling. Known as Kitsunetsuki, this phenomenon was both feared and respected. To be possessed by a fox spirit was not merely to be troubled by a ghost. It was to become a stage upon which the spirit performed its will. Symptoms ranged from uncontrollable laughter to sudden weeping, from mimicking fox cries to speaking with unnatural eloquence. In some cases, the possessed person might demand specific foods, such as rice or fried tofu, thought to please the fox. Families sometimes treated the afflicted with kindness, offering gifts at shrines in hopes of persuading the spirit to depart. In other cases, priests or shamans were summoned to perform rituals, chanting sutras or brandishing sacred implements, to drive the fox away. Whether or not such possessions were ever more than illness, they were deeply real to those who experienced them, and they wove the Kitsune into the everyday fears of rural life. Japanese literature of the medieval and early modern periods abounds with these tales. In Kanjaku Monogatari Shu, an anthology compiled nearly 1,000 years ago, fox stories appear beside Buddhist parables and heroic sagas. In later centuries, kabuki plays and no dramas gave the kitsune roles of pathos and power, sometimes comic, sometimes tragic. Ukiyo-e woodblock prints showed them gathering in processions at night, their tails lit with ghostly fire. The image of foxes assembling under the glow of the moon became a symbol of enchantment, an otherworldly gathering hidden from human eyes. In these artistic traditions, the kitsune became not only a figure of folklore, but a motif through which artists explored deception, longing, and the uncanny point. One cannot ignore the kitsune's role as a moral teacher. Their stories often warn against arrogance, greed, or cruelty. A man who mocks a wandering stranger may discover too late that the stranger was a fox spirit in disguise, returning later with retribution. A farmer who shows kindness to a wounded fox may find his fields blessed with abundance. In this way, the fox embodies the principle that the unseen world is never far from the visible one, and that one's actions ripple beyond what is immediately understood. To respect the fox is to respect mystery itself, and to acknowledge that the universe holds more than what the eye perceives. There is also an enduring link between the fox and fire. In folk belief, foxes carried small flames called kitsunabe, foxfire, that glowed in the night. These lights, sometimes seen across fields or hovering by paths, were said to be the lanterns of fox processions. To follow them was dangerous, for they could lead a person astray into swamps or forests. Yet they were also enchanting, beautiful in their shimmering glow. In the imagination of poets, the foxfire became a metaphor for fleeting beauty, for the delicate line between wonder and danger. It is said that on certain nights of the lunar calendar, thousands of foxes would gather under a great tree, their tails blazing with fire, to pay homage to their leader or deity. Villagers who glimpsed such a scene might bow in reverence, knowing they had stumbled into a moment of divine spectacle. As centuries passed and Japan modernized, the kitsune retained its presence, but in new guises. The fox appeared in novels, in children's stories, in theater, and even in modern popular culture. Yet beneath these adaptations, the ancient currents remain: the power of transformation, the fear of possession, the double-edged trick of illusion. The fox continues to be a being that lives between boundaries, animal and divine, trickster and teacher, feared and beloved. To listen to these stories is to dwell in that liminal space, to accept that not everything can be explained, and that perhaps not everything should be. Tonight, as the quiet deepens, imagine the faint glow of foxfire in the distance. Imagine laughter drifting on the wind, half human, half animal. Imagine the possibility that the stranger you passed today was more than they appeared. In the stillness, the kitsune lingers, not far away, waiting for the next listener to wonder, the next dreamer to believe. In the long twilight of Japan's history, before the electric glow of lanterns became common, and before the sounds of railways sang through the valleys, there were foxes in the fields. They were small, russet, graceful creatures, and they slipped across the landscape with such silent ease that people often felt they were watching something more than an animal. The rice paddies shimmered in the mist, the hills curved gently toward shrines and villages, and the fox, kitsune in the Japanese tongue, became not merely a beast of fur and bone, but a thread woven into the spiritual imagination of the people. To speak of the kitsune is to speak of both fox and spirit, both the cunning of nature and the mystery of belief. The earliest records of the kitsune appear in Japanese texts more than 1,000 years ago, in the Heian period, when tales and poems flowed through the court like silk. But long before ink fixed them to scrolls, foxes had already carried their reputation into the minds of farmers and wanderers. A fox seen in the twilight was a messenger of shifting boundaries, neither wholly tame nor entirely wild, not fully day nor fully night. The Japanese countryside, cradled between mountains and sea, lent itself to this ambiguity. When the mist rose from the ground, when lantern light flickered on the paths, a fox's darting shape seemed almost like a spirit announcing itself. In folklore, the kitsune possesses the rare gift of transformation. With practice, with age, and with the deepening of its mystical power, it could take human shape. Sometimes it was a wandering traveler, sometimes a beautiful woman who arrived at a lonely farmhouse door. sometimes an elderly monk or a lost child. The art of disguise, so often a human craft, was given to the fox as its supernatural birthright. A man might meet a stranger on the road, share stories, and only later discover that the stranger's shadow had the telltale outline of a fox's tail. In other stories, a farmer might fall in love with a woman of extraordinary grace, live with her for years, and discover only at the end of his life that she had been a fox in disguise, testing him, blessing him, or binding him in an enchantment. The Kitsune is often divided into two broad categories within Japanese lore: the Zenko, the benevolent celestial fox associated with the deity Inari, and the Yako, the mischievous or even malevolent wild fox that delights in trickery. Inari's foxes wear white fur in the imagination, symbols of purity and divine protection. These foxes are often seen as messengers of the kami, guardians of shrines, protectors of rice harvests. Travelers bow before stone fox statues that sit at the entrances of shrines, their eyes carved with solemn intent, their mouths sometimes holding a key or jewel. Offerings of rice, sake, and fried tofu, the fox's favored food, are left at these shrines. To this day, even in the great cities of Japan, one can walk through the red torii gates of an Inari shrine and find those stone foxes watching with eternal patience. But the Yako, the wild fox spirits, dwell in shadowed tales. These are the tricksters, the deceivers, the ones who lead travelers astray with phantom lights. They whisper laughter in the dark. They appear as women to lure men from their paths. They trade comfort for confusion. A farmer might wake to find his tools missing, only to later discover them tied high in a tree. A traveler might be convinced he is walking a straight road, yet by dawn realize he has been circling the same grove of trees all night, watched by sly fox eyes. Yet even in their mischief, these foxes carry a kind of lesson: not to be too proud, not to ignore the possibility of enchantment in the everyday. The mystical qualities of the Kitsune deepen with age. In many traditions, the number of tails a fox possesses marks its level of power. A young, unseasoned fox spirit has only one tail, but as centuries pass, it grows more. At 100 years, it may have 3. At 1,000, it reaches its pinnacle: 9 tails, glowing white or golden, radiant with wisdom and supernatural force. The nine-tailed fox is a being of immense power, capable of illusions that last lifetimes, of wisdom that surpasses human kings, and of magic that can alter the course of nations. The mere mention of a nine-tailed kitsune carries with it both awe and unease, for such beings are no longer mere spirits, but forces of destiny. The stories of kitsune often hover between reverence and fear, affection and caution. Villagers respected the foxes around them, feeding them scraps at the edges of fields, hoping for protection. But they also carried charms against fox possession, for some tales told of spirits entering human bodies, twisting them with mischief or madness. Priests and healers were summoned to drive them away. Fox possession was said to bring strange symptoms: uncontrollable laughter, a craving for fried tofu, the tendency to bark or cry like a fox in the night. Whether these were understood as real illnesses or metaphors for the sly disruptions of fate, they remained part of the kitsune's long shadow in folklore. Over centuries, as Buddhism and Shinto intermingled, the kitsune took on layered meanings. They became symbols of fertility, of marriage, of secret unions. They embodied the thin line between illusion and truth, between the sacred and the profane. In ukiyo-e prints, foxes glow with lantern light as they gather at crossroads on winter nights, their tails burning like torches. In plays and poems, they stand as lovers or deceivers, as guardians or tormentors. Through each retelling, the fox maintains its role as the liminal being, never fixed, always transforming, always reminding humanity that the world itself is not so solid as it seems. Tonight, as we drift into the quiet rhythm of these ancient tales, imagine the soft rustle of rice stalks in the evening air. Imagine the flicker of lanterns along a shrine's path. Somewhere in the distance, a fox cries, high, sharp, cutting through the silence. Is it merely an animal in the dark, or is it a spirit, a messenger, a being that has watched generations pass while it lingered between worlds? The kitsune waits at the edge of vision, playful, mysterious, and enduring. And so begins our journey into its lore. There is a quiet rhythm in the stories of foxes. They begin as simple tricksters, playful and mischievous, and as they grow older, they deepen into beings of immense mystery. The pinnacle of this journey is the nine-tailed fox, the Kitsune, whose tails are both a measure of age and a mark of spiritual power. If one imagines the life of a fox spirit stretched over centuries, each tail appears not as decoration, but as the flowering of wisdom, as though time itself leaves its signature on the body of the creature. By the time the ninth tail unfurls, the fox has transcended ordinary existence and become something akin to a deity. In Japanese lore, the nine-tailed fox is often linked to divinity. Some are benevolent, serving as messengers or avatars of Inari, the kami of rice and prosperity. These foxes, radiant and noble, are honored at shrines, where stone guardians watch over offerings of rice and tofu. They are not tricksters, but protectors, their multiple tails glowing softly in the torchlight of shrine festivals. Farmers prayed to them for abundant harvests, and travelers bowed in respect as they passed through sacred gates. To dream of a nine-tailed fox was to dream of fortune, longevity, and the blessings of unseen powers. Yet another thread of the nine-tailed fox's story carries a darker hue. In some traditions, especially those influenced by Chinese and Korean tales, the nine-tailed fox becomes a dangerous seducer. Known for its dazzling beauty and cunning mind, it may disguise itself as a queen, a courtesan, or a wandering noblewoman. Whole kingdoms are said to have fallen because a ruler succumbed to such an enchantress. The most famous of these stories is that of Tamamonome, a woman of striking elegance who served at the imperial court. She was beloved for her intelligence, her musical skill, and her radiant charm. But when illness swept through the emperor's household, suspicion fell upon her. Diviners revealed that she was no woman at all but a nine-tailed fox in disguise, who had plotted to drain the life from the throne. Pursued by warriors, she fled into the wilderness, her tails flashing like banners of fire. Even after her death, her spirit was said to linger in a cursed stone, the Sesho Seiki, which for centuries was believed to kill birds and travelers who passed too near. This duality, protector and destroyer, blessing and curse, makes the nine-tailed fox one of the most complex figures in Japanese myth. On one hand, it embodies wisdom and immortality, its 9 tails like a crown of light. On the other, it embodies the dangers of unchecked desire, the fragility of human power before supernatural cunning. Such ambiguity is not a flaw, but a lesson. That strength and beauty can heal or harm, depending on how they are wielded, and that mystery cannot be easily confined within human categories of good or evil. The nine-tailed fox also bridges the local and the universal. In Japan, it is Kyubi no Kitsune. In China, it is the Huli Jing, and in Korea, it is the Gumiho. Each culture tells its own variations, but the heart of the legend remains the same. A fox who has lived long enough to gather 9 tails possesses unimaginable power. The similarities suggest an older, shared root, a whisper that crossed seas and mountains, carried by traders, monks, and travelers. In this way, the fox becomes a cultural thread woven across East Asia, reminding us of the interconnectedness of human imagination. To sit with these stories is to feel the pull of eternity. The nine-tailed fox is not only a creature of folklore, it is a meditation on time itself. Each tail is a century, a reminder that patience yields transformation, and that hidden beneath the ordinary world are forces that endure far longer than human lifetimes. In the stillness of the night, as dreams gather like shadows around the edges of sleep, the nine-tailed fox lingers as a symbol of mystery that no explanation can fully tame. Close your eyes and imagine a quiet shrine nestled deep in the forest. Lanterns glow softly, and beneath the cedar trees a fox steps forward. Its tails shimmer like silk banners in the dark. Perhaps it is a protector come to watch over you. Or perhaps it is a trickster ready to test your heart. You cannot know which, but that is the essence of the kitsune's gift. It invites you to dwell in uncertainty, to rest in the beauty of the unknown. The story of the kitsune is not a single tale, but a tapestry, woven with threads of laughter, caution, reverence, and awe. We first met the fox as a playful trickster, hiding in the forest shadows, testing human pride with clever tricks and illusions. Then, we watched it shift into the form of the companion, capable of love, loyalty, and tragedy, bridging the wild and the human with fragile tenderness. Finally, we stood before its ultimate form, the nine-tailed fox, both divine messenger and dangerous enchantress, a creature embodying the duality of blessing and curse. Through these layers, the kitsune becomes more than a spirit. It is a mirror held up to human imagination. In its tricks, it reflects our folly. In its companionship, it reveals our longing for connection. In its 9 radiant tails, it shows us our fear of power we cannot control and our awe before wisdom that endures beyond lifetimes. The kitsune is playful, yet profound. It is dangerous, yet protective. It shifts between shapes as easily as it moves between meanings. And perhaps this is why its legend has endured through centuries, because it never allows itself to be only one thing. Like the shimmer of a dream, it resists capture, reminding us that mystery has its own sacred place in the world. If you close your eyes now and let the silence of the night surround you, you may almost hear the faint rustle of leaves, the quiet patting of paws, or the soft laughter of a voice not quite human. The kitsune passes by, neither fully seen nor fully gone. It leaves behind only a gentle reminder that the boundaries between worlds are thin and that sometimes wisdom arrives disguised in the shape of a fox. The Tikbalang belongs to the vast and lush forests of the Philippines, where humid air clings to the trees and the canopy filters sunlight into shifting patterns of shadow. It is a creature spoken of in whispers, a guardian and a trickster, a spirit that stands tall with the body of a man and the head and hooves of a horse. Oral traditions across the Philippine archipelago, especially from the pre-colonial period, describe its long limbs, its strangely inverted knees, and the uncanny way it is said to appear on forest paths just when a lone traveler has begun to feel lost. The Tikbalang does not roar, it does not scream, it simply watches with unblinking patience, allowing its presence alone to unsettle even the bravest as with many mythical beings born of natural landscapes. The Tikbalang is both feared and respected. To the people who first told stories of it, the forests were not merely a collection of trees, but a living, breathing entity. They provided food, medicine, and protection, but they could also conceal dangers. To step too far from familiar routes was to risk never returning, and the myth of the Tikbalang embodies that risk. One can imagine ancient hunters, fishermen, or farmers pausing at the edge of the woods, repeating the warnings of their elders. Beware of the Tikbalang, for it delights in leading you astray. Unlike monsters that destroy or devour, the Tikbalang is above all a trickster. Its favorite pastime, according to legend, is to lure travelers deeper and deeper into the wilderness. A person walking a straight road may suddenly find themselves circling the same tree over and over, their sense of direction warped by unseen forces. Sometimes, they may even see faint shapes ahead, a figure, perhaps, or a flicker of movement that draws them onward, though the forest seems unchanged. By the time they realize something is amiss, the Tikbalang's laughter may already be rustling through the branches. The stories vary in tone, some describing the creature as mischievous, others as malicious, but always it stands as a reminder of nature's power to disorient the human mind. The appearance of the Tikbalang has been recounted in various ways. Its equine head may resemble a carabao, the water buffalo common to Philippine villages, or a horse introduced through trade. Its body is sometimes described as gaunt and skeletal, with ribcage visible under taut skin, while other tales speak of a muscular form, taller than any man, dominating the path with sheer height. The detail of its legs bending backward is a recurring one, a subtle distortion that makes it seem uncanny, neither fully beast nor fully human. This inversion of form mirrors the inversion of sense that it causes in travelers. To encounter a Tikbalang is to feel as though the world itself has turned the wrong way around in old beliefs. There are ways to resist the Tikbalang's tricks. One must wear their shirt inside out, or tie a cord around the waist, or sometimes bite one's thumb as a gesture of defiance. These small rituals gave confidence to villagers moving through the woods at dusk, when shadows lengthened and the feeling of being watched became impossible to ignore. They also remind us of how folklore serves not only to entertain, but to equip. To believe that there was a spirit of mischief in the forest was to prepare oneself with charms against disorientation, to turn fear into ritual. Some traditions even go further, suggesting that the Tikbalang can be tamed. If one is brave enough to pluck 3 golden hairs from its mane, the creature may submit and become a powerful guardian. This transformation, from trickster to protector, shows the dual nature of the myth. The forest spirit may deceive, but it may also serve, depending on the courage and cleverness of the human who encounters it. The Tikbalang thus mirrors the forest itself, which can bewilder but also sustain, depending on how one approaches it. When Spanish colonists arrived in the Philippines in the 16th century, they recorded the Tikbalang in their writings, often interpreting it through their own Christian lens. They described it as a demon, an evil spirit sent to torment the faithful. Yet this framing misses the subtler truth. To the people who had carried the stories for generations, the Tikbalang was not evil so much as otherworldly. It belonged to the liminal space between human and wild, where respect was demanded and arrogance punished. In this sense, the Tikbalang connects the spiritual with the practical. It is the embodiment of both fear and reverence for the forest. The persistence of the Tikbalang in modern Philippine folklore shows how deeply it resonates. Even today, rural areas carry tales of strange laughter in the trees, of travelers who swear they walked for hours without finding their way home, only to emerge suddenly on the very path they started. In cities, the Tikbalang has been reimagined. In literature, comics, and film, yet always it retains its essential form: tall, horse-headed, and trickster-hearted. It has become a symbol of the uncanny, a reminder that even in an age of maps and satellites, the forest still holds its mysteries. The quiet power of the Tikbalang's myth lies not in violence, but in suggestion. It does not tear apart villages, nor bring storms, nor breathe fire. Instead, it unsettles. It whispers into the mind of the wanderer, turning certainty into confusion. In the stillness of the night forest, where the calls of insects echo endlessly and every rustle of leaves feels deliberate, the Tikbalang does not need to show itself fully. Its strength is in the imagination it provokes. And so the legend endures, generation after generation, carried along paths where footsteps falter and directions blur. The Tikbalang, unlike many other creatures of myth that exist primarily as warnings or punishments, often plays a role that is more elusive, more whimsical, and yet strangely unsettling. In the scattered and dimly lit trails of the Philippine forest, the creature is said to hide among shadows, waiting not to strike, but to mislead. A traveler, already weary from the heavy air and damp soil, may suddenly feel that the path has shifted, that the trees are no longer familiar, and that every step returns them to the same clearing. The Tikbalang, they say, delights in such games. It can twist the senses, make north feel like south, and make a straight trail curve endlessly back upon itself. But such tricks, told in whispers by elders around the glow of an oil lamp, carry within them not only a story of mischief, but a lesson about humility in the presence of the forest. For the forest is not only a place of passage, but a living being in itself. To walk it carelessly, to ignore its rhythms, is to fall prey to the Tikbalang's laughter. The myths insist that to escape such confusion, one must take a piece of clothing, wear it inside out, and whisper a quiet prayer. With that gesture, the enchantment lifts, and the path becomes straight once more. This detail, the turning of clothing inside out, has become one of the most distinctive features of the Tikbalang's lore. Why such a curious remedy? Some say it is because the Tikbalang itself exists inside out, its knees bent the wrong way, its very body a reversal of human form. To mirror this inversion, to meet inversion with inversion, is to untangle the riddle it weaves. In a sense, the myth reflects an older truth, that opposites meet in balance, and that disorientation is healed by deliberately reshaping one's own perspective. Across the centuries, this trickster role has served a dual function. It warns of the danger of wandering without respect for nature, and at the same time it frames the forest as a place of enchantment. It is not enough to mark a path with one's feet. One must also walk with awareness, with a willingness to listen. Thus, the Tikbalang is less an enemy than a tutor, less a monster than a shadowed companion of human journeys. In Spanish chronicles of the 16th and 17th centuries, when missionaries described the beliefs of the native peoples, the Tikbalang appeared as one of the many creatures the colonizers dismissed as superstition. Yet in dismissing it, they inadvertently recorded it, giving later generations fragments of text to hold alongside the oral tales. These written accounts, tinged with skepticism, nonetheless preserve the image of the horse-headed trickster leading men astray, often accompanied by references to crossroads, moonlit clearings, and the eerie sounds of the forest at night. The story of being led astray is not unique to the Philippines. In Northern Europe, tales of will-o'-the-wisps describe lights that lure travelers into swamps. In Japan, fox spirits play tricks on lost wanderers. Yet the Tikbalang stands apart, for its form is both towering and familiar. Horses, brought by the Spanish, became intertwined with its image, blending imported reality with native myth. What results is a hybrid, not unlike the forests themselves, where the ancient trees met with foreign seeds, where cultures blended, and where stories adjusted to accommodate new arrivals. And still, beneath these layers of history, the core idea persists, that the path is not always what it seems, and that one must cultivate both respect and cleverness to navigate it. Whether one calls it enchantment or illusion, the experience of being lost is universal. The Tikbalang, then, becomes an emblem not only of the Philippine forest, but of the wider human struggle to find direction in uncertain terrain. One can imagine the villagers of centuries past, gathering under a thatched roof as rain struck the bamboo walls, telling these stories to children and neighbors. Perhaps a man who had wandered too long in the hills told of a path that betrayed him. Perhaps his listeners nodded, whispering that the Tikbalang had played its tricks again. In the retelling, confusion is transformed into explanation and disorientation into story. What was once a frightening moment of being lost becomes a shared cultural touchstone, softened by laughter, deepened by belief, and as the candlelight flickered, the Tikbalang remained just beyond the forest's edge, never fully banished, never fully proven. A creature of inversion and confusion, reminding each listener that the world is not as fixed as it seems, and that even the most familiar trail can, with a whisper, turn strange. As the centuries unfolded, the Tikbalang continued to live not in the jungles alone, but in the imagination of the people. Oral tradition gave way to folktales in print, and folktales found their way into poems, songs, and even stage plays. Yet, what is striking is how the creature endured, not as a frozen symbol, but as something pliant, shifting in form and meaning. Much like the forest trails it was said to guard in the everyday life of rural villages, the Tikbalang became a shorthand for experiences that had no easy explanation. A hunter who lost his way but returned home with nothing could point to the Tikbalang's tricks rather than his own miscalculation. A child who strayed from the group might be warned that a Tikbalang had whispered to him from the trees. A farmer who found that his oxen refused to move forward on the path might declare that the creature had been blocking their way, invisible to the human eye. Through these stories, life's accidents gained coherence, and uncertainty acquired a face. Even if that face was equine and shadowed, the Tikbalang also became a lesson in balance, as stories frequently stressed the way to appease it. A small offering of tobacco, a murmured prayer, or the act of politeness to unseen presences could turn misfortune into safe passage. Thus, the creature was not only a source of fear, but a negotiable figure. One could, with the right ritual and attitude, strike a temporary truce with it. In this way, the lore reinforced cultural values, respect for elders, attentiveness to ritual, and recognition that human beings were not masters but participants in a world shared with countless spirits by the 19th and early 20th centuries. As nationalism grew in the Philippines and local culture became a ground for identity, the Tikbalang was often invoked as a distinctly Filipino symbol. Artists painted it, writers reshaped it, and humorists even placed it in satirical sketches, where it played less the role of a fearsome spirit and more that of a clownish figure representing confusion or folly. This adaptability allowed it to endure in modern memory when many other spirits faded into obscurity. Yet despite these cultural transformations, the essence of the Tikbalang remained. At its core, it has always embodied disorientation, liminality, and the reminder that humans are not sovereign in every space. The forest still belongs to itself. Travelers must still be cautious. Paths are not guaranteed to lead where one intends. The persistence of these themes suggests that beneath the imagery of horse heads and backward knees lies a deeper recognition of the fragility of human direction. The Tikbalang has also survived by being flexible in imagery. In some stories, it is skeletal and towering. In others, it is merely lanky and mischievous. In one region, its hair is said to be golden, while in another it is black and tangled. These variations reveal less about inconsistency and more about the way myth works, constantly adjusting, never still, mirroring the fluidity of the societies that tell them. Even in contemporary culture, the Tikbalang remains alive. It appears in comics, video games, animated films, and novels. Sometimes it is portrayed as terrifying, sometimes as humorous, sometimes as tragic. A symbol once confined to the forest trail now wanders through the screens of modern devices, keeping its identity both intact and renewed. To a global audience, it becomes part of a wider pantheon of trickster figures, standing beside Kitsune, fawns, and satyrs. For Filipinos, it remains a thread tying them back to the humid forests of their ancestors, to the whisper of bamboo leaves in the night that I in this way. The Tikbalang embodies something essential, the power of myth to persist. By bending, to endure by transforming. The traveler may no longer fear losing his way in the forest, but in the larger journey of culture, of history, and of self, the Tikbalang is still there, reminding that paths twist, that certainty slips, and that humility and imagination are as important as maps and compasses. And so the creature remains, half shadow and half laughter, a teacher in disguise, an echo of footsteps in the mist, and a horse-headed sentinel at the border between the known and the unknown. When we step back and gather the many threads of the Tikbalang story, we see not simply a monster, not simply a horse-headed apparition, but a map of how people across centuries have made sense of the unpredictable. The Tikbalang is a creature that thrives in transition, between the village and the forest, between safety and danger, between certainty and confusion. It embodies that moment when a path you thought you knew begins to twist, when the air around you feels heavy, when silence is broken by something that cannot be explained. To peasants and farmers, it was a reminder of humility. The Tikbalang was never a beast that could be hunted, tamed, or slain. Instead, it was something one had to live with, negotiate with, show respect to. Its very presence reinforced a worldview in which humans were not the masters of their environment, but part of a vast web of seen and unseen forces. The small offerings, the whispered prayers, the careful etiquette, these were ways of recognizing that the world was not built solely for us, but shared with other presences. The storytellers. It was a blank canvas upon which lessons and laughter could be painted. Some tales emphasize the horror of being lost, the cold sweat of wandering in circles until dawn. Others transform the Tikbalang into a trickster, almost comedic, whose antics are closer to mischief than menace. Still others place it as a wise test-giver, a threshold guardian who watches over those who wander. This versatility explains its survival. A monster bound tightly in one role is easily forgotten when that role no longer fits the times. But a monster that can bend, shift, and transform according to cultural need continues to walk beside us. The modern imagination. The Tikbalang is both heritage and reinvention. It stands as a distinctly Filipino myth, a creature with no exact parallel in the stories of other cultures, but one that resonates universally because it captures a feeling all humans know: disorientation, the loss of bearings, the sudden sense of being at the mercy of something larger than oneself. Even for those who have never set foot in a Philippine jungle, the image of the horse-headed trickster resonates, joining the larger chorus of global mythology. What makes the Tikbalang uniquely enduring is that it reminds us of the invisible. In an age of maps, GPS devices, and digital certainty, the idea that one can still be led astray by forces unseen is comforting in its own way. It suggests that mystery has not fully retreated from the world, that there are still places where imagination fills the gaps in understanding. To believe in the Tikbalang, or at least to listen to the stories about it, is to accept that life contains more than what is visible, more than what can be measured. And so the Tikbalang survives, in the forests where shadows cling to the roots, in the tales told by grandparents to children, in the brushstrokes of painters and the scripts of modern writers. It survives in the collective heartbeat of a people who have long recognized that paths are fragile things, and that to walk them with humility is the only sure way forward. When we close our eyes and imagine the old paths of the Philippines, we may hear the rustle of bamboo, the soft clop of unseen hooves, the quiet laughter of something hidden. The Tikbalang waits there, not to terrify, not even to harm, but to remind us of the strange and delicate balance between human certainty and the wild, untamed unknown.